At this point, the movie is probably about 3 weeks old or so. I got really bad stomach flu when Across the Spider-Verse came out. I don't really know how it happened and how that lined up. I wanted to talk about Across the Spider-Verse. I'm going to assume that you've either seen the movie or don't care, because it's weeks old at this point. My spoiler-free section here review is that I loved the movie. I thought it had very good music, and I thought that the animation style was as beautiful as ever. If you're a Spider-Man fan, I think it's obviously worth your time to check out. And I guess if you're not a Spider-Man fan, or maybe you're just a newer superhero fan, or maybe you've just seen the original, I think even just as a general animation fan, it's a beautiful movie that is worth people's time. I'm going to talk a lot more in depth about the movie in spoilers, so if you enjoyed today's review, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I do make movie reviews on this channel. I also do content around games, other kinds of media, comic books, collectibles, all kinds of stuff that I think is fun, so I hope you will join me for the ride. We're at over 118,000 subscribers, which honestly, I'm very honored. I appreciate that very much. Now, Across the Spider-Verse is obviously the sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, and because of that, it builds on the themes of the original movie quite a bit. The original movie, Into the Spider-Verse, is very much a very, very good, solid, one-off type origin story. It could have never received any sequels, and it would have been a great movie. I love that movie very much. I have a review of that movie up on this channel, and honestly, I think it's just a beautiful, well-made film with excellent animation, fantastic character development. So imagine my surprise, I guess, when Across the Spider-Verse came out, and I actually thought it was even more interesting. I think this movie is even prettier than the original. The animation style has been perfected in a lot of ways. There is a lot of really unique stuff done with animation here that I think is really, really cool. So for example, there are a lot of different animation styles used when the characters are from different universes, and I think that's really, really awesome. So for example, the medieval Vulture looks completely different than, say, Miles Morales or even Miguel, you know, Spider-Man 2099, because he's from a totally different era, and he's kind of more like this, I would say, Leonardo da Vinci type drawing, instead of being a, you know, fully colored in character of the modern day. And I thought that kind of stuff was really interesting and really cool. They did already show some stuff like that in the original movie, but I thought it was cool that they went further in on that gimmick here. And I do think a lot of that too, when it comes down to taking more risks, comes down to the fact that Sony didn't really know how the original movie was going to go. And personally, I think that the original helped animation in the West be taken a lot more seriously. Yes, obviously you have the kids who grew up with animation who are adults now who take it seriously, and yes, of course, you also did have fans of anime in both the West and East who respect it, but I think more of general audience, it's something that you have to get them on board with. Into the Spider-Verse did a great job, and we can see that with Across the Spider-Verse because people showed up in droves. This movie did fantastic in theaters, and it's really cool to see, and the reason I'm talking about it is just because animation is something that means a lot to me, so it's really nice to see creativity and actual style paying off in that way. That payoff also led to a longer movie. This film is over 20 minutes longer than the original. The original falls just under 2 hours. This movie goes a little bit, or I believe over 2 hours and 20 minutes, or right around that mark. And I think that's something that was really interesting because it did help to actually flesh out the story. I thought we got a lot more natural and kind of extended character development in this movie, and there was time to focus on more than one or two characters, which is, I guess, one of the very few criticisms I had of the original movie. Yes, it's concise and to the point, but because of that, we really only get to see much character development for Miles and also Peter B. Parker. In this movie, they're able to kind of go deeper with Miles' character development, actually develop a villain really well with character development, and also develop a few other Spider characters through character development too. So for example, we get to see more of the backstory of Miguel, and he is absolutely fantastic. I thought he was just a standout in this. One of the few criticisms I've seen on the internet is that this version of Spider-Man 2099 is not actually super comic accurate, and while I do agree that he's very different, it doesn't really seem like he was always that way. We actually got a post-credits sequence in the original movie that showed Spider-Man 2099 actually starting to go through the multiverse on his own. And then, of course, in this movie, he's built a little different, he's a little darker, and obviously, of course, he's gone through a very big tragedy himself with pretty much accidentally destroying an entire world. We are going to probably find out more, but the multiverse rules are interesting and odd to me. I know that they're trying to tie this in with the MCU because there are direct references to different Sony Spider-Men. There also is a direct reference to the MCU Doctor Strange and Peter Parker as well, with the events that they accidentally caused in No Way Home. So I thought that was interesting that Miguel actually references that. But what I was getting to with this is, in Miguel's backstory, the reason that he is so obsessed with maintaining order in the timeline, and the reason he runs sort of a spider society of different Spider-Men from across the multiverse in order to police this, is because he himself, when traveling through the multiverse, found a world where he existed and was happy and had a family, but he died. So instead of actually making that truth known, what he did was he decided to step in and live the life of his previous self from that universe, but it destroyed the entire world. It destroyed that entire reality. And Miguel talks about it basically like it was ruining the canon events of that world, that he should have stayed dead and that would have, changed things. What's interesting about it though too is we also did find out about things like incursions in Doctor Strange 2. So I'm not sure if they're going to actually tie that in, like, well, actually he didn't disrupt a canon event. What happened was you had this version of the character walking around this world for way too long, and eventually he caused an incursion and destroyed it, like Strange Supreme did in Doctor Strange 2. I'm not really sure. Like, that's something that I don't fault the movie for, but I'm trying to figure out how much they're trying to tie this to the MCU rules of the multiverse. But the point that I'm getting at with all of this is I can't really tell if the reason he destroyed a world was actually because he broke the canon events, or because he, caused an incursion. It's hard to tell because Sony and the MCU working together is a little weird. I know they can reference each other fully, so it's kind of like a complicated element of the movie that isn't bad, but it's certainly something that I'm interested to see if they will flesh out, or if they will keep as vague as possible. Because weird people like me, when we watch movies like this, ask a billion questions, and I have a billion questions about that element, but it didn't detract from the quality of the movie at all. In fact, I thought it was very interesting, and it made me really think about the movie quite a bit. But something that I loved about Miguel in particular is that he was a very good character who was, I would say, not a villain, but a philosophical opposite of Miles Morales. He actually provides a lot of thought to the movie, and his whole obsession, like I said, is preserving the timeline. So when Miles actually encounters him, it's very different because Miles is all about freedom and free will and making your own decisions, even though those decisions sometimes have consequences. And Miguel is basically about, I've experienced the consequences of those decisions, and I don't think that we should go there, right? It's interesting though, because Miguel is very violent about it, almost totalitarian in a way. But when you see what he went through and the pain that he caused, and you think about the fact that he probably ended trillions of lives by destroying an entire reality, you can kind of understand why the guy holds all of this rule stuff so personally and takes it so seriously. There's also a lot of big twist moments in this movie that I thought worked very well with the whole Miguel versus Miles element of it, because something I thought was really fascinating was the reveal that Miles, according to Miguel, was not supposed to be Spider-Man, kind of telling him that because the spider that bit him in the original movie came from another reality, that actually wasn't supposed to be that Miles's fate. It was supposed to go to someone else in the reality that it was from. I thought that was really interesting because Miguel revealed essentially that Peter would have still been alive in Miles' universe in this movie, and that Miles never would have become Spider-Man. So he essentially says, like, hey, listen, you never were supposed to be Spider-Man in general, you are an anomaly as well. But what's interesting about that is you would think, right, that if Miles broke the canon of his own universe on accident by being bit by that spider and becoming Spider-Man, I guess you would think that that would have destroyed his reality, right? If Miguel was right about everything, that breaking the canon events, that breaking these events that are supposed to happen in time, that you're not supposed to mess with, that would ruin things, that would destroy your reality. You would think it would for his world, but it didn't. And that's something I find interesting, is how the rules of this universe and the multiverse and time all work together. It was very sci-fi. Like, this movie was a lot more sci-fi than I thought it would be, and I really love those philosophical differences kind of coming to a head. One thing I was not expecting, though, is that even though Miguel is sort of the central antagonist to Miles, despite being a protagonist from his point of view, the actual main villain of this movie, and who appears to be the main villain of the next movie, is the Spot. This is a character that I thought was going to be played more as a joke, especially in the beginning of the movie, where he pretty much is one. And when they reveal his origin story, it's kind of one of those things where it just seems like an absolute joke. And he was also a character that was played as a joke a lot of times in some of his original appearances as well. So when I saw Spot in this movie, I thought, oh, this is just going to be kind of like a silly throwaway thing. There's going to be a real villain. I mean, the characters in the movie even call him the villain of the week, and he wants to be special because he was kind of a nobody. He was basically this scientist in the original movie who got hit in the head with a bagel when Peter B. Parker and Miles ran through one of Kingpin's research facilities. And so he was a character that was just a throwaway character in the original movie. I'm sure that, well, I would assume they weren't planning for that character to be the villain and that they decided to go back and do it. I'm not exactly sure, though. Maybe in an interview they had already decided to do that or something. No idea. But it was something that I thought was just kind of silly, and that was going to be a throwaway character and a throwaway origin for a stupid little character. But over the course of the movie, this character becomes more and more unhinged because he's trying so hard to become more powerful and become more of a threat to Spider-Man, because he wants to give Spider-Man an actual villain. What ends up happening essentially is, by the middle of the movie, I've heard his music described as like eldritch horror type music, and it's true. I mean, even his theme itself goes from something that's kind of peaceful and whimsical and silly to this disturbing, really dark melody that's off key and just scary. And that's kind of what happens to him too. I mean, he keeps feeding himself this multiversal energy until he pretty much just becomes this entirely black mass with these weird white looking sore type portals on himself. And his voice is completely distorted by the midpoint. And he shows Miles a flash of what he's going to do to his world, which is essentially destroy it and kill his dad. And he pretty much says, I'm going to take everything from you the same way you did from me. And it's really interesting because when you look at this character, you think, haha, like a little funny character who can't even control his own powers. That's silly. Okay, Spider-Man will wrap that up real quick. And then when more than one Spider-Man is going after this character because he's causing some problems, you think, okay, well, they're all going to be able to handle him. This guy is not exactly a, A-tier threat. He's a little bit of a joke. But by the midpoint of the movie, he's just become this kind of terrifying force that I thought was really interesting, because I don't think audiences were expecting to take him that seriously, and to kind of walk out of the movie like, wow, this villain went from comedic to terrifying. I think it's something that really makes me look forward to the final movie in this trilogy, Beyond the Spider-Verse, where we're going to actually see what happens with him. Because I thought he was a really, really strong villain for Miles, and in fact, probably one of the more terrifying on-screen superhero movie villains that I've seen in quite a while. They did an excellent job with this, even changing his animation style when he's at full power to just kind of this terrifying abstract looking thing. It was done super well in the movie. Speaking of characters, I did want to talk a little bit about a couple of the other characters that appear in the movie. I know I focused a lot on Miguel and Miles, but in some closing thoughts on characters, I think one of the strongest character developments in this film was Gwen. I wasn't going into this movie expecting tons of character development for Gwen just because she didn't get a lot in the original movie, and I thought, okay, well, we're probably just mainly focusing on Miles. So the fact that this movie could balance character development of pretty much 4 main characters, Miles himself, most of the movie from his point of view, and things around him, then of course, Miguel, Spot, and Gwen, I think is really excellent. And I think that that's kind of where that extra 22 to 25 minutes of runtime goes. You can do a lot more with, that kind of runtime on screen to actually show this character development. The movie did an excellent job getting into Gwen's family dynamics with her father, and there were moments in the movie where I was genuinely shocked by things that happened to her. So she's pretty much disowned by her father earlier on in the movie because he thinks that she killed her best friend. Peter Parker became the Lizard, and Spider-Woman fought the Lizard, and the Lizard died. But he didn't really understand what had happened, that it was a supervillain or anything like that. He just thought, okay, well, Spider-Woman murdered my daughter's friend. So he's going after her, and then eventually he corners her when she's hurt, and she has to reveal who she is, and he has basically a mental breakdown and still tries to arrest her because it seemed like he was in denial and just kind of losing it in that moment, and that pushes him away from his daughter because Gwen at that point leaves with Miguel and, you know, Jessica as well, which is our Spider-Woman, and they go off into the multiverse, and that's where they all cross paths. And I thought it was interesting to kind of see this family dynamic and also see it later on when it's repaired a little bit more, because I thought it added a ton of humanity to Gwen. I mean, Gwen was always cool, she was always an interesting character, and the backstory she gave, even though it was brief in the original movie, was touching, but to actually see more of that and see them get into that in a more in-depth way, again, I think it's that runtime that really helped. You can waste your runtime like a lot of movies do, where they feel slow and meandering and like they're not going anywhere. But one of the things I loved in the Spider-Verse movies, both of them so far, is they make use of pretty much every minute of runtime. Yeah, maybe there's like a few seconds here or there that you could say like that wasn't for me. But overall, they are trying to humanize and build on those characters as much as possible in the amount of time that they have. There were a couple Spider characters, I would say, that were built up in the marketing that I thought were going to have more to do with this story. This isn't really a fault of the story, but I don't think some of these characters mattered. I did notice that a lot of the Spider-Men that we've seen were either referenced or appeared on screen, and some of them were really cool. Like, for example, I saw Spider-Man Unlimited. Spider-Man from the PS4 game got one line in the movie, because he showed up in the background and he said something. It was cool to see Donald Glover as a live-action Prowler, even though he only showed up in one scene very briefly. I'm not really sure if he was supposed to be from the MCU or not, because we did see Donald Glover actually in the MCU, so I'm not entirely sure. But I do think it's interesting to actually see him in the movie. Most of the characters that showed up were done respectfully, or they at least appeared on screen, you know, for a few seconds to be like, hey, I remember Spider-Man Unlimited, or hey, I remember Spectacular Spider-Man. But there also were some character inconsistencies that I'm not entirely sure I buy as a super ultra mega nerd. You might not care about, but I am going to mention. For example, as somebody who watched all of the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon, I do have a hard time believing that that version of Peter Parker would advocate that Miles Morales should go with fate and just let his father die. That was something that was a little odd to me. That didn't, to me, fit with that version of the character, especially if characters like Spider-Gwen and even Peter B. Parker would at some point kind of reject that sort of lack of free will predestination stuff. It I guess for me was a little hard to believe that Spectacular Spider-Man would have advocated for that, but he was only on screen for like 10 seconds, and it was very clearly supposed to just be like a, hey, you remember Spectacular Spider-Man? Look, he's here, let's give him a line. So it's like, I can't fault the movie too much for that, but the one character I really didn't like in this film, even though he's a minor character, was Ben Reilly. Now, as a huge Ben Reilly fan who actually enjoyed the Clone Saga for what it was, I know, please put down the stones, alright? It's been since the 90s, we can let it go at this point. I think one of the good things that came out of that story, whether you enjoyed it or absolutely just despise it, was Ben Reilly. And I also know that this is not the comic book Ben Reilly, but as pretty much the only Scarlet Spider that mattered in this movie that was on screen for maybe more than a second that I might have missed 300 yards away in the background, this version of Ben Reilly was just really odd. Yeah, I know that Ben sometimes was a little sulky and a little emotional, but it was kind of just played for comedic effect that he was this guy who would narrate everything he did and that he was super over dramatic and not very skilled and could just get dismantled really easily. I understand that playing a Spider-Man like that is funny, but as a big fan of Ben, I just thought it was kind of weird to pick him. Again, it's not like that makes the movie bad, it just felt like a really weird, inconsistent Ben Reilly. But maybe this is like a Ben Reilly that just totally is that way and it's not supposed to be at all like the comics. I would just think that if you were using that character from the comics or from inspiration from them, that would have been a little more like him. I guess that's just kind of a criticism I had, which it doesn't really matter or affect this like overall quality of the movie. It was just kind of something that I was kind of scratching my head at, like, am I missing something? I feel like I've read a majority of Ben's comics from since he was created, not all, but a majority, so it just didn't really feel like him at all. But I also understand that they do change things with these adaptations. It's just odd because a lot of what they changed was very consistent to either who characters were or who I could see them becoming if they went through certain events. Like even Miguel. Yes, he's not the Miguel from the comics, but I could see Miguel turning out that way in a lot of ways if he went through something so traumatic. I also do think there were a few Spider characters that were just completely irrelevant that were in the movie just to kind of be there. Like for example, Spider Bite, I noticed this character even got a Funko Pop and everything. And again, being one of the, you know, ultra nerds who collects those things, I thought it was interesting that they marketed a little bit off this character when this character is not really in the movie very much. But I don't think that really affects the quality of the movie. I just think there were so many Spider-Men that there was no way to focus on all of them. That's not necessarily bad, but I did find it interesting that a few of them weren't focused on that I expected to be. In a final note, some of you who are Spider-Man fans might remember that from probably 2 years ago, maybe even more, I made a video about Spider-Man on the PS4, and I talked about how I've never really been a fan of the Spider-Punk style or the character that much. I always thought it was just kind of an overly edgy character that was just there to kind of sell to overly edgy people who thought that they were anarchists and stuff. And I don't want to make this political in any way, but you know who I'm talking about. You know, like the kind of consumerist anarchist, like who thinks that they're all like fight the man, but then they're always on their iPhone tweeting about everything and they're always out buying into consumerism and stuff. I always kind of felt like in a lot of stories, Spider-Punk was played that way. This movie changed my mind quite a bit on this character. Now, while I might not fully line up with the character's belief system, I don't really think that matters at all, because this character was done extremely well in this movie. When I saw Spider-Punk was in the movie, I was kind of expecting to be like, oh, this is just going to be like an edgy character for a few jokes, and that's going to be it, okay, whatever. That's just what I assumed going into the movie. And I actually think this movie does a really good job of dismantling assumptions in a lot of ways, and it does a really good job of humanizing pretty much everyone in a way where you can look at them and what their gimmick is or what their whole shtick is or any of that, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, Spot, he's a crazy loser, but he's a really deep human when you actually write him that way. And that's something that I thought was really cool with Spider-Punk that actually made me, I guess, reevaluate some of my biases or biases, however you'd say it, around the character and make me actually want to check out some more of the works that he's been in that have been good. Because this was a character that was surprisingly deep and done very well in his small amount of runtime. And again, without that extra runtime, I really don't think they could have gotten into these characters as well as they did. In a final note, you've probably heard me mention the music a few times. I think the soundtrack of this movie is superior to the original in many ways. And the reason I believe that is because it conveys a lot of emotions, and there are a lot of different tracks that really encapsulate who the character is that they're about. Spider-Man 2099's theme, while I can't play this music here because I don't want copyright strikes, it's something that's very futuristic but also scary. It's like futuristic and haunting in a way. But then you get to Spot's original theme, and like I said before, it's just kind of angelic and like prancing through the fields. And then his second theme, where he's actually just full on insane and powered up, is dark and scary and creepy and this kind of eldritch type thing. This movie's music, it stood out to me so much. And while I enjoy the MCU, when we got into sort of the age of the MCU, I think some of that music became less memorable outside of a few characters' themes like Iron Man and, of course, the Avengers. It kind of became a little more samey sounding. This movie did such a good job of not making homogenous music. The music fits every character that it's supposed to be about, and it sounds wildly different for different characters, and I loved that so much. It's very memorable. It's probably the most memorable music I've heard in a movie in years. So while I do have a couple criticisms of every movie I see, I guess, they're not glaring in any way with this movie or the original. I love these films. They are some of the strongest superhero films out there, at least in years, I believe. And I think they have so much heart and soul. So often all ages movies are just either crap for kids, or they're crap for adults, or they end up just being garbage for everyone where they can't actually, be applicable to everyone. This reminds me so much of classic Disney or Studio Ghibli even, where it's like whether you're 14 or 44, this movie can apply to you and you can enjoy it. And I love that kind of thing. I thought it was done excellently. Usually when something is for everyone, it ends up being for no one. But talented writers they can make something for everyone and make it really good. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I want to thank my channel members and my Patreon members here of the appropriate tiers. I'm going to show some names here, so I appreciate you all very much. I also do have another channel, Degenerate Plays, where I play through games together with my wife and with my friends and stuff. I hope you'll check that out. That's in the description down below. And finally, I have another channel, The King of Creepy, where I do horror content. If you enjoy my voice for some reason, I barely do, but maybe you do. And my wife Jill has a channel, Magical Jill, where she does things like anime and Pokemon videos, as well as reviewing different collectibles. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and as always everyone, stay shui.